What's going on, everybody? Today we're going to be talking with Bjorn Andreas Bull-Hansen, a best-selling novelist from Norway who's authored around 20 books and is also, well, just one hell of a Renaissance man. Many of you know him from his very popular YouTube channels, plural, where he talks about Viking history, archery, bushcraft, connecting with nature, men's self-development, world events, and more. So without further ado, welcome, Bjorn. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you. That was a lot of kind words there.
Yeah, cram a lot in there. Yeah, I talk pretty fast, so it just kind of goes together. So Bjorn, teaching in college, I teach a lot about the Vikings. I love it. I think a lot of people are drawn to the Vikings for a lot of different reasons. And, I have my own thoughts on that. I'm sure you have yours, but you're on a totally different level than I am, for sure. You spent years researching and writing numerous books about Vikings, among other topics as well. You do historical interpretation events about Vikings and the Viking Age. You make videos about their lifestyle, their weaponry. You make your own Viking bows, and you've even built your own Viking cabin, which is pretty awesome. I just want to hear from you. What is it for you that resonates so much, that, with Vikings, that resonates so much with you?
Well, for me personally, it's my heritage. So it's comes natural, I guess. And I've been fascinated by that part of Scandinavian history for as long as I can remember, actually, even as a child. But I think if most people, I think, find something that is real, true, and honest in the Viking lifestyle, if you will. There is something about it that you can't find it anywhere else, I believe. There's something quite unique about it.
Yeah.
And it's quite hard to define, actually.
Yeah, I tend to think of it personally. For me, there seems like an immense amount of freedom involved in sort of that lifestyle, right? That you think everything from the trading expeditions to the exploration to even the raids to everything. There's the adventure of it. There's that freedom aspect. I think a lot of people seem really drawn to it today. I see, movies popping up, TV shows popping up, which, by the way, I have a separate question on that for you. But it seems to resonate with a lot of people. And it's kind of neat to see your videos and see you kind of being hands-on with that history. And I think it inspires a lot of people.
Well, that's my impression as well, that it really does. And I am very happy to make a small contribution to bringing the Viking Age back, if you will.
No, you're doing a hell of a job, Bjorn. Hell of a job.
Well, I tried to do my best, at least, and I think I just want to say, before we move on and talk more about this, that there is, of course, a difference between, and there should be a difference between what we view as what we like about the Viking Age, what we take from the Viking Age, and there's a difference between that and the real Viking Age as it was 1,000 years ago, obviously. So I'm not saying, and I don't think anyone sensible is saying, that we should go back to doing things exactly like they did it, because that would be quite horrible, actually, in many ways. But it's okay to take parts of it and integrate it into our lifestyle. That's what I try to do myself.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think everybody understands. And kind of along those lines, what are some of these things you've taken from maybe your own study of the Vikings that have contributed to your own self-development?
Well, you mentioned freedom. So you could say that during the Viking Age, freedom was not granted. It was not a human right to be a free person, right? But freedom it seems to be very central and important in the lives of the Vikings. When I say Vikings, you'll have to forgive me. I'm translating from Norwegian as I'm talking, and we say Vikinger or Vikings as about all the people living in this part of the world back then, even though it's not correct, because only a small percentage were actual Vikings.
Sure, sure.
But so I should say Norsemen, but I forget and I say Vikings instead.
You're good, Bjorn. I know what you're talking about. I do the same thing in my class where I get in the habit of calling Scandinavians Vikings, and then I'm like, well, yeah, well, they're Norsemen, but Vikings are the people who are leaving. But then they come back too, so it's kind of yeah, it's easy to mix up the terms.
Discussion, or not so much a discussion, but the fact that not only Scandinavians were on board the Viking ships, that was predominantly Scandinavians, of course, but there would be other people there as well, fighting together with the Vikings as Vikings. But no, I forgot your question.
Yeah, no worries. Just curious, with all of your research on the Vikings, some of those aspects that you brought into your self-development, you mentioned freedom, obviously being a big one. That's a big one for me as well.
Yeah, being close to nature. And I think just as important as freedom, or maybe even more important, duty, obligation. I've talked a lot about this actually in my videos. Well, I think I have. This thing, people today, they have this thing about they want to be happy. That's their life goal, right? And I think it's very foolish, because you won't get happy if that's your life goal. You will get happy along the way as you are striving towards your real goals in life, which could be to be a good husband, father, and provider for your family, which could be for some people other things, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jordan Peterson or not.
Yeah, I know, and I know he talks about the same, and
yeah,
it's interesting because I believe he's a Christian. So, but of course, this is not a lot of the things I'm talking about, and a lot of the things that I say I take from the Viking Age. You can take that from other cultures or religions or as well, but I do get annoyed when they say it's a Christian thing, for instance. It really isn't. It's something that we share in common. It's common sense.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that's just a Christian tenet at all. It's interesting, as Jordan Peterson says, he says you shouldn't strive for a life of happiness to always be happy. You should strive for a life of purpose. Yeah. And I think I think through purpose, and I think that's what he argues, is through purpose, you find meaning in your life. Exactly. And that meaning creates happiness. So it's kind of a roundabout way, if you will, of getting there, but it's not about happiness. It's about creating meaning, pursuing purpose that creates meaning. And if it creates happiness out of that, great. But even if it falls short of that, the beauty is that you've still had a very purposeful life. You've impacted things for the better.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I'm with you. So I forgive me, but I have to ask this since we're talking a little bit about Vikings here. There's all these Viking shows that have come out. I'm sure you're familiar with some of the movies, some of the television series. You've got. Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm not very familiar.
Oh, okay. It's probably a good thing, Bjorn.
Okay.
So I was going to ask, you as a Viking scholar and historian, I'm curious how torn you've been with some of this stuff. On one hand, you've got, you know that these shows and movies are maybe getting people interested in Viking history, which is good. But then on the other hand, you've got the blatant distortion of the past. You've got the interjection of kind of wokeism into this stuff. I just kind of, I don't know if you watch the shows or not, but I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, I haven't watched the shows, to be honest with you, and that's because they are, I imagine, very close to what the genre is very close to what I'm doing, since I'm writing historical novels set to the Viking Age. I'm not saying it's similar, because I think from what I've seen, photos and stills from those TV shows, it makes me cringe a little bit. Some of the stuff I'm seeing, and that's the visuals of it, the haircuts, the clothing, and stuff like that. And also, there is enough that you can take out of the Viking Age that would actually, I believe, do the job. They didn't have to change anything. So, but these people, they want it their way, and they don't care about being historically correct. And in a way, that's okay. It's, as long as it gets more people interested in the Viking Age and the Viking lifestyle, that's great. But I do get a little bit annoyed when people typically write in the comments, not very often, but on my videos, sometimes I get comments like, you can't have Viking ancestry because you don't have blonde hair. The Vikings didn't have long hair, and so on and so on. And it's very silly, but I try not to get myself worked up because of that, because these people, they've seen the TV shows and they think that's real history, while in reality it's fantasy, so yeah.
Yeah, I when I teach about the Vikings in my classes, I kind of have to dismantle a lot of these things that they've learned from watching these shows, right? Or just in popular culture in general, being, the horns, or, all these ridiculous things that they add.
Well, and I have to say something about that.
Sure.
It's funny, the one with the horns.
Yeah.
But could be that one guy had he put horns on his helmet.
Yeah,
you never know. You never know.
I'm sure it happened.
Yeah, well, probably that he didn't. That was probably the last thing he did, because it catches the axe or the sword right here.
Right. It keeps it. Yeah, the blow within the head.
Yeah.
I try to picture it too on the ships, with the rigging and the sails. You would think, like, you don't want to be the guy who punctures the hole in the sail, right? You don't want to be that guy. Nobody's going to like you after that. It's not conducive to anything that Vikings do. I've always found it humorous. My understanding is, for what it's worth, is that it's one of these things that was later sort of applied to Vikings to denote them as being pagan, sort of the devilish horns, in the same way that you might see images of Christians with a halo over their head, right? They don't literally have that circle over their head, but it's to denote piousness, or like piety.
Yeah,
that's my understanding. I don't know if you've ever come across that, but with the Viking horns.
I've heard the exact same. I don't know how old that image of the Vikings with the horned helmets, I don't know how old it is. My guess would be it's quite recent, from modern times, but I don't know. I don't know. But it's kind of funny, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll watch the shows. Like I said, as a historian, I'll watch the shows, and I want to love them, and then something will happen, and I can't do it. I just can't do it. I have to I'm done with the show. I try to push myself through it sometimes. It's just not having it. I started watching, there's a new show, what is it? It's Vikings Valhalla. It just came out not very long ago. I think it's on Netflix. And so they have this role of this local Jarl at Kattegat. And I think his name is Jarl Håkon or something like that. And I was like, all right, here we go, right? Let's meet this guy. And she is a African-American woman that comes riding onto the set as this guy. And, you know, again, as a historian, I can't do it. It drives me crazy. It drives me absolutely crazy.
That's stretching it. That's first that it's a woman in that position, which wouldn't happen. But a woman, as you know, could take that position if she was widowed, or for a period of time. If the earl was killed, for instance. I'm just trying to imagine here. I'm playing the devil's advocate, and
Sure.
So it could happen if the earl married a woman from Africa, and they sold slaves to
Sure.
the merchants there. So they did have contact with those people. So if the earl married an African woman and then was killed, and there were no sons and no brothers, so maybe then for a short period of time she would act as the earl, and then you could have an African woman as earl in the Viking Age.
So you're saying it's very likely that this was historically accurate. I understand. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
It is possible. Like it's possible that if I walk out into the woods here, I would see an albino bear or something like that.
Possible.
It is possible. Yeah, I'll give
possible, but unlikely. Yes.
Very unlikely.
Yeah, I had for what it's worth, I think, I don't know, I think being a historian, you know, doing what I do and you doing what you do, in some ways it might make me a bit more sensitive to it than maybe other viewers, that there's this aspect of just the way that I am where historical truth must be held sacred at all costs. And I hate to just see revisionism come in under different guises and kind of interjecting things in there that in many ways I have to go back and I have to correct in the way that I teach a lot of this stuff. And again, it's not just that this character, who by the way is playing a real person who existed historically, it's problematic. Like it would be less problematic if it was like Game of Thrones, right? It's a fantasy world. It's totally fine. You know, you can do what you please. It's just, it's more of an issue for me, I guess, as a historian. It's just more of an issue seeing them take real people and real history and kind of make it something very different is all.
Yeah, they lack respect because if you're saying this was a real person, so I don't like that. It's what is that what you call this, the cultural appropriation? Is that what they call it?
Yeah, I think cultural appropriation. I don't know. It's a pretty expanded term nowadays, but that idea that you can effectively take things. Some people can take things from some people, and other people can't take ideas and inspiration from others. There's some weird rules involved with cultural appropriation.
Yeah,
not that I abide by them, but
I'm not going to watch it. I hate it.
You're okay.
Not to talk.
Not trying to rile you up. I rarely get an opportunity to talk to anybody who is really an expert on this, and it's always fun to kind of bounce these ideas around. So, like I said, on one hand, I love that they're introducing people to the Viking Age and they're getting them really interested in it, and hopefully it inspires people to read some real books on the subject and and get to know it really well. But the shows are hit and miss. We'll just put it that way.
Yeah, but you could say, you know, they did it with the Native Americans for a long time with what do you call white people?
Yeah.
Playing with
yeah, usually we get Italians. We get Italians to play those roles.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty wild. Yeah, as an American, I can vouch. Yeah, Hollywood used to find Sicilians, sort of like Southern Italians, and they would throw them into the role because they're like, hey, you look the part. There was a famous Native American who he turned out not to be a Native American. His name was Ironized Cody, if you ever look him up, and he ended up doing a bunch of commercials about sort of like polluting the environment, and he was in the commercials as this apparently as a Native American chief, and it came out later that he was he was not Native American, he was Italian or something along those lines. Okay. This happens quite a bit though, but Hollywood just flat out throws these people in. It used to just throw people who look like natives in, and of course nowadays we can look back on that and we're like, all right, like, there's probably a much better way of doing that. But it's funny because it makes me think down the road, I wonder if we'll look back on some of this stuff today and say something similar, right? Like, well, maybe there was a better way to have done that. And
yeah, well, it's my culture there that they are messing with. So, and again, there was, as you know, there are enough strong women, if that's what they want, from the Viking Age. In the sagas, it's not difficult to find, it's not difficult at all. Why don't they use one of those then?
Yeah, that is interesting you bring that up, because I know, in a lot of your videos I've watched, I saw a presentation you gave one time, and people were just, there's some people in the audience who had some, whatever, they were being a bit ridiculous towards you, and they were talking about, how bad the Viking Age was and so on and so forth. And absolutely, like, I can understand all the atrocities that were occurring during that age. But there's also something to be said about the treatment of women within those communities, which was surprisingly, much more egalitarian than a lot of societies at that time. So, it's not about going back to the Viking Age in all regards, but there were certainly some things about it that are very positive, for sure, especially in regards to like I said, the women.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's easy to see that you mentioned women. Well, women had a much harder time after Christianity was introduced here. One example is that before Christianity, boys and girls did sports.
Yeah.
After Christianity, only boys were allowed to do sports.
Sure. Yeah.
At least, from what I've read, and I've read it several places. So, of course, we don't know for sure. I guess there were people letting their daughters do archery and skiing and so on, even after even after Christianity. But so one example.
Yeah, I know. I read a lot about sort of hunter-gatherer primal lifestyles, things like that. And there's a great book by this guy named Randall Eaton, who I actually interviewed who's my last person I interviewed. And in it, he makes some good points talking about how, in many ways, the emergence of agriculture, transitioning people out of hunter-gatherer societies into these stable, building cities, permanent dwellings, that the advent of agriculture in many ways brought about this, how do I put it, the rise of, and I hate this term, but I use the term, they would call it the patriarchy, right? This rise of male dominance within these societies. Whereas in hunter-gatherer societies, a lot of it was the division of labor by sex, not because men are necessarily better than women or women are better than men, but men and women were better adapted at different things. And it was just understood that, okay, you're better adapted for this, we're better adapted for this, let's work together for mutual survival. But it seems that with the advent of agriculture, societies shifted those roles, and in many ways, women obviously were put in a subordinate position. But it's interesting that in Viking society, it's not nearly as pronounced in that way, and it just seems more egalitarian. And I guess that's one of the things that's often overlooked. And like you said, when they're making these movies, there's some great examples of historical females that you could actually bring in during the Viking Age, that you could do it in a way that's much more historical and much more respectful of, well, your own culture as well on top of it. But
because nobody will believe in African woman being Earl in Scandinavia during the Viking Age. Nobody will believe that. But you could pick a historical figure, an actual historical female figure instead.
Yeah, there were a lot of comments when they announced that, and they ended up shutting down. I think it was on Instagram or something. I read about it. That they ended up shutting the comment section down because of I'm trying to think how they described closed-mindedness or something like that of the people. And you know, it's tough because we're in this day and age where you really have to walk on eggshells, unfortunately, in a lot of regards. Not that you necessarily should, but there's this pressure to walk on eggshells, and it's tough because in many ways you can't even have, you know, a conversation about this and be like, look, like, you know, from a historical perspective, like, let's analyze this, right? Like, maybe this isn't the best way to interject this stuff, and there's some other ways you could do it. Like I said, that would be much better. But anyway, I digress here a little bit. Sorry. All right, so let's keep going here. Got a lot of other questions for you. Want to make sure we can get through some more of these. Now, you spend a lot of time outdoors, obviously a lot of your videos. It's been a big part of my life. In just some communication we had before the interview, I talked to you a little bit about that, but it's obviously a big part of yours. Now, as I mentioned, the last interview I did was with this author by the name of Randall Eaton, and he spent a lot of his life studying nature and our connection, our human connection with it. And he uses this term, and I love it. And he says nature, he calls it nature deficit disorder. And he uses it to describe our current disconnection with the natural world. And he argues that a lot of our angst, our anxiety, depression, and sort of discontent stems from this nature deficit disorder. And I really want to talk to you about this. I want to get your thoughts on this because I feel like this would resonate pretty well with you.
Yeah, that's. I wish I had come up with that, because that describes it perfectly, actually. Yeah. Nature deficit disorder.
Yeah, your doctor would never probably, you know, say that, you know, Bjorn, I'm sorry, test came back, it appears that you've got some nature deficit disorder here. We're going to put you on a strict regimen of getting outdoors. Yeah.
I actually heard about a doctor in Norway, I think it was Norway, who did that. He said to some of his patients that you need to take a walk in the woods or something like that. I think, if I remember correctly, it was in a few years ago. Yeah, well, most people, they live in boxes and they look at boxes and squares, and that's their life. That's not a good life. It's very artificial, and it's very easy to fall victim to what other people want you to feel. You know, it's very easy to become manipulated in certain ways, so that you will buy certain stuff or vote in a certain way, or don't buy certain stuff, or you know. So the contrast would be, if you don't have a smartphone and you spend a lot of time outdoors, that would be a much better life, in my opinion. So I personally threw away my smartphone. It's been a year, I think. Has it been a year or more than a year? More than a year? Can't
Bjorn,
remember.
can I pause you 1 second here?
Yep.
I've been wanting to personally ask you this. I remember in one video you talked about the light phone. Just for my own interest, are you still using the light phone, or did you find a different? No,
I didn't, because the one I got had not good sound at all.
Okay.
And then I had, meanwhile, I had gotten used to using one of these old things here, and I don't really have the need for anything more. Yeah. Not saying the light phone is rubbish. They sent me another one actually. I haven't tested it, so yeah, I use one of those, and it's actually, it doesn't matter what it is. It's, you can, old people buy these, well, still, you know, so, and me. I'm kind of old anyway, so yeah.
No, you're good. I only have to, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I had to ask because I've been looking at the light phone for a long time after watching that video of yours, and I thought, well, man, you know, I'm thinking about switching over here, and I've done a lot of stuff on my phone with like privacy, trying to, you know, my search engines that I'm using and things like that. But you know, going back to the nature stuff, it's just one more way you can kind of more easily disconnect from all the nonsense and more easily transition into what's funny, but what is the real natural world, right? It's like the less distraction you can have in this sort of fake world that we've created, and the ease of moving back into nature, I think the better.
Yeah, well, I don't think about it so much anymore, but especially, I would say, especially after the past 2 years, when I have not been able to leave Norway because of the lockdowns and all that, and I haven't been socializing, and I haven't missed it. I have missed traveling, but when I go to a city, I feel the difference. And what I feel actually when I go to a city is that everything, there are rules for what you can, how you can move, and where to move, and what I feel like I have to behave myself all of the time, you know.
Sure.
And I feel like they would, if I don't watch my steps here, they will see that I'm not one of them. It sounds strange, but I'm just being honest with you. It's a feeling. I know it's not like that, but it's a feeling, and that feeling is a symptom, if maybe, of me living my life. Not like it's not like I live under a tree in the woods, but I live in a rural area, and I don't really spend time in cities. I don't have a smartphone. I do use a computer, but not having a smartphone means that I only use a computer when I have to. It's not for fun, you know. So
Sure.
I don't really know how it is to be immersed in this new world of constant, I don't know. I don't know, because it's been a while, you know, and I'm never going back. Never going back.
Yeah. No, I think we're part of nature. I think spending time in nature is a necessity. I think that there's sort of an angst. There's kind of a discontent that comes with that disconnection. And you know, for somebody like me, who I spent a lot of, so basically I grew up, my parents ran a summer camp, which I'm sure you have those in Norway as well.
Yeah.
But my parents ran a summer camp, so I was one of those lucky kids who lived there full time. So I shot archery, I canoed, I ran around the woods. That's how I grew up, and I loved it. And in high school, my parents moved out to Colorado, and it was really a continuation of that same thing, where now all of a sudden I was now in the mountains, right? And instead of sort of the woods of the Midwest, I'm now in the mountains, and just a completely different environment, but just as free, just as wild. And I think I mentioned to you, I started building a log cabin in high school. I finished it before I graduated. So I spent about 3 years with an axe on top of a mountain, sort of living out my mountain man fantasies. Yeah, yeah. When I was like 16 years old or whatever, 15, 16 years old. And it was glorious. And honestly, it's funny, I'm 40 years old now, and looking back, it's some of my favorite times of my life was all that time I spent out in the woods, working with my hands, nobody around me, just I was really immersed in nature, and I was, having an amazing time. And it's funny is, then I went off to college, and the longer I was at college and then eventually going into grad school, the more disconnected I became from nature, right? Like, instead of sort of being in it constantly, it would be relegated to a couple camping trips here and there. And I became almost, I describe it like almost like a tourist of nature, where I could go and I could see it, but it doesn't, it's not real. It doesn't have that impact. There's an author who describes it as, he says it's something like a hungry beggar looking through the window of a bakery, and he can see the bread and he can smell the bread, but it doesn't fill his stomach, right? It doesn't have that deep, profound impact that it's supposed to have. And it really wasn't until I got very intentional about getting back into nature in whatever way I possibly could, and doing it enough that you kind of begin returning to it. And what's crazy is when that happens, at least for me, Bjorn, is when that happens, everything in this, I call it the civilized world or whatever you want to call it, it all shifts, right? The stresses, the things you're stressing about, like, those aren't, many ways, they aren't real. They aren't real problems, or they're not as bad as you make them out to be, right? And I think we look for distraction in technology. We look for distraction in all these things, but you can get to a point that you can develop legitimate peace and sort of tranquility by going back to where we came. And it shouldn't be a profound idea. It shouldn't be any sort of like new age theory, returning to nature, in whatever way you can. But it seems almost, I don't know, people look at it today, they look at it today like it's such an inconvenience. And I think it says a lot about how far we've wandered off that path if we see it that way. Drives me crazy sometimes.
Absolutely. Now, I have to correct myself, because I think I said that I don't use my computer for fun, but I do, because I do watch YouTube videos, and I do have some communication with friends and so on my computer. So I just wanted to add that technology doesn't need to be bad, but it needs to be something that we go to when we want to. Now it's, for most people, it's always there. It's always in your face, and I find that many people today, you said it, to them it's an inconvenience. I also find that there is a lot of people that are actually scared of the wilderness or nature. They are scared of the darkness and scared of wild animals. And to me, that's very strange, because the same people will probably not be scared of the things that we should be scared of, which I read somewhere, we are born with a fear for loud noises and falling down. And in addition, we should be scared of things that move very fast, stuff that are, poisonous and toxins, and angry people, right? So it's like, it's common sense, right? So, but we will gladly move through a city with cars rushing by, and that's natural. And we will consume things and we don't even know what it is, and we will we will watch scary movies that makes us scared of the darkness, right? So that's a disconnection to me. Doing all these strange things that, I know it's not dangerous to walk along a road while there are cars, and we shouldn't be scared of the cars, but it's so strange to me that people are not scared of those things, but they are scared of the darkness in the woods, which is, it's strange to me.
Oh yeah, no, I know plenty of folks who are absolutely terrified by it. It's a little odd, when you think our ancestors didn't just survive in that; they thrived in that environment. And
Absolutely.
Here we are. I don't know. Just it makes me sad. It makes me wonder if someday my ancestors will kind of come back and they'll line up me and modern men and just sort of take a look at us and think like, oh man, you guys disappoint me. Most of you, I'm very disappointed in what I'm seeing. I strive personally. One of my things is I strive not to be one of those guys that if it ever comes to that they'll be like, all right, well, this guy looks like he's got a little bit going for him, so give him a pass. But the rest of you, right? The rest of you need to get to work.
Well, I'm guilty as well, because I like sugar, stuff that you can't really find, at least not easily, in nature.
Most people like that too, Bjorn. It's addictive. It's not just you.
Yeah, I'm a soft mattress, and having heating in the house. All these things, I absolutely appreciate those things. But if I had to choose between always living like that, never being able to go out in nature, and always staying out in nature, I would choose staying in nature forever. I wouldn't hesitate at all.
Yeah, no, I think much the same. In one of my videos, I talked about how crazy it is to think that, we live in this day and age where we walk into a house and it's climate controlled all year round. I mean, it's remarkable when you think about it. And you think about, how comfortable our beds are, that we have clean water literally on tap, right? Like we have all these amazing comforts, but so many people are so miserable, right? Like you would think it would raise more red flags, right? That the more comfortable we get, the more, anxiety, depression, angst, in many ways, maybe this comfort is not so good for us. There's a book by, I think his name's Michael Easter. It's a fantastic book called The Comfort Crisis. If you ever get the opportunity, I highly recommend it. But in it, he kind of throws that theory out of, and he uses a lot of interesting research and data to kind of support it, is that the less we expose ourselves to sort of uncomfortable physical, what would I call it? Not maybe episodes, but just uncomfortable physical environments, sort of getting yourself, going out and doing something, trying to come up with something creative to do that involves some physical action. The more you do that, the better you are mentally, the better you are physically, the happier you are. Not like we said that you have to strive for happiness, but it just coincidentally also makes you happy. But I don't know. I think there's a lot to be said about being too comfortable,
Yeah, absolutely. And some people take that not only too far, but into the extremes, and they will do whatever they can to feel better. So they will overeat and drink too much, and not exercise, and just watch crap TV, and
and
it's a very unhappy life,
Yeah, nothing illustrates it better than the lazy boy chair. Are you familiar with the lazy boy chair? It's the big comfy chair where you can pull a lever and then your legs kick out and your body goes back. And they make them now, Bjorn. I don't know if you know this. They make them with refrigerators in the side, so you can actually, as soon as they add the toilet, you'll never have to leave. You just melt into the chair and nobody will ever see you again. It's amazing.
Oh.
Anyway, though, but yeah, sorry, bringing it back on track a little bit. I'm curious if you noticed this. This is one other thing. I talk a lot about this with my friends when we go on like fishing expeditions and things like this, these big fishing trips out in the middle of nowhere. But I've always thought this is really neat is I find that when I go on these trips, the first couple days, I'm kind of transitioning out of sort of this life, right? Transitioning out of the technology and you know, the constant distraction, the buzzing of the phones, you know, all this stuff. These responsibilities that I think like, oh, you know, I should check this or I need to make sure I do this. And those start kind of quieting down. It's like turning the volume all the way down and you become much more aware of your surroundings. And I've always loved, this is one of my favorite things is you become alert. You become awake is really what you become. And I don't know if you've experienced that as well, but it's one of my favorite things about spending extended time in the woods.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't get the chance to spend extended time in the woods much anymore because of obligations and so on with my family. But we live in a place where we live there in a way. So I have felt the exact same as what you're describing there. I also felt that when I stopped using a smartphone. So that turned down the volume a lot and it stays there. So
that's a good point.
By the way, if you're hearing some strange sounds, that's one of the dogs sleeping just right beside me here. So
that's not you moaning in the background there?
No.
Okay. All right. So I got another one here for you, Bjorn. Now, to sort of put the man in Man vs. History, my YouTube channel here, I spend a lot of time reading books on masculinity. And to be clear, you know, we're not talking about machoism or any of that nonsense, but rather a deep exploration of what it means to be a mature masculine man and why a lot of people in the modern age are sort of struggling. A lot of men are struggling to find purpose, meaning, contentment, peace. And I'm just kind of curious because you've talked about a lot of this in your videos. So I'm kind of curious what you think might be leading to this crisis of masculinity and what you think maybe we could do to remedy it.
Well, a lack of purpose, maybe. That's at least one of the things. And also there's a thing going on now where men are encouraged to remain boys. And I see that a lot, especially in Norway. I see that it's almost like if they become men, they think that they shouldn't do that because they should remain silly little boys, even if they're in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And that means that they can be emotional about football, soccer. They can't be emotional about stuff that really matters. That's a little bit on the side of this, but I'll try to keep to the topic.
No, it's so Bjorn, it's okay. You let this thing meander as you see fit. I love talking about this stuff. It's all
yeah, that's one of the reasons. We should instead have a culture where boys are encouraged to become men. And by men, I don't mean a 1950s image of the man that, you know, dad comes home from work and the wife has his slippers and his pipe and the newspaper ready and dinner, of course, and he will sit down and say hello to his kids and
pat them on the head.
Yes. I'm not talking about that nonsense. I'm talking about being present, being responsible, being, playing with your kids, spending time with your kids and your family.
Being a stabilizing force.
Yeah, that's a good thing. And
yeah.
being there. And most, well, I don't know if most is the right word, but lots of fathers are. But lots of men they don't want to become fathers even, and that leads me to another thing here. I know for a fact that lots of young men think that they can't approach women because it's wrong, or it's I don't know what's the word, abusive, or whatever. It's well, that's not right, And of course, you shouldn't act like a fool, but when young men think that it's wrong to approach women, then we're dying as a species, actually. So
yeah, I think
all these things are natural. All these things are natural and should be part of a man's life, and we should go through these natural phases as a man. And I see that many people, they don't do that now. This makes me a little bit worried, actually.
Yeah. There appears to be, well, there's several things going on, but we see a lot of sort of stunted masculinity, sort of half-baked, only partially developed. Like it's the continuation of the boy into manhood, I guess, is maybe
I made a video, a response video, actually. I never do that, but I made a response video to, not really a response video, but there was this guy who had this rant on a live stream against a young woman who was there.
I saw that. Yep, I know who you're talking about.
I can't remember his name now, but doesn't really matter. And I thought that's not right. He is my age, and that she could have been his daughter. So I felt that's very rude, and I checked the whole background there, and apparently there's this culture with where they call themselves masculine men, but it's not really masculinity. It's very, well, if it is, it's the most immature form of masculinity, the kind of masculinity that you would find among a 17-year-old, a group of 17-year-old boys, where they try to be very tough. And
I get it's that possessive, violent, abusive sort of it's that they believe that acting out is sort of that natural part of manliness, where opposed to actually being sort of a how do I put it? It shows his inability to to maybe control his own masculinity, right? He can't actually control it, and it's manifesting itself in a more destructive way, in the way that a boy would.
Yeah, and this idea, what really got me, because I read up on that culture, that subculture, what really made me worried was this idea that you shouldn't treat women nice. You shouldn't. You should treat them like, I don't know, but I treat women nice. I always have. I try my best and to treat women nice, and I will probably treat women nicer than I treat men, because that's just how it is. But apparently that's wrong, according to these people. But you know what? That's actually masculinity. Your need to be nice to women. That's how it should be, and it's a masculine thing. So I don't know where this comes from, but my guess is that it comes from it has grown out of a culture where people don't really know what masculinity is. So they grabbed this, as you said, a violent, abusive thing.
Possessive, yeah.
Yeah, they're calling that masculinity, but it's not.
Yeah, so Dr. Eaton, who we did that last interview with, he's got this book called From Boys to Men of Heart, Using Hunting as a Rite of Passage. And so he dives into it from sort of an anthropological point of view, about how the lack of rites of passage today to sort of usher boys into manhood helps account for a lot of the, these whatever you want to call it, these immature forms of masculinity. That because young men aren't ushered into manhood by elders, right? By other men farther along sort of the manly path, who can kind of guide them through that journey, who can help temper their natural sort of aggression, assertiveness, things like that, and temper it in a way that they can come to control that side of them, right? Like, you don't want to be harmless, but you know, it's because you can use violence for good, in the sense like you can use force to protect, you know, your family, your friends, your community, etc. But there's if you don't have rite of passage, sort of the perspective is that you either end up one of two ways. If without rites of passage, you either end up as sort of the aggressive, possessive boy, or man-child, whatever, or you end up as sort of the domesticated, sort of delicate man who's out of touch with his masculine energies, who's afraid to upset women by even approaching them, who is just sort of lacking that, lacking that courage. And it's weird, because on one side you've got a group of men who are in touch with some of those masculine energies, but they're manifesting themselves in very negative ways. And then on the other side, you've got a group of men who aren't in touch with those masculine energies, and they end up becoming more just so docile, so tolerant that they're not, they're really of no use to anybody. It's an odd thing. All this, of course, is completely opposed to, say, the true masculine man, right? Which is what we strive to be, right? That acting as a stabilizing force for good, right? Being patient, being protective, providing, right? Doing all these things. It's funny, but in many ways, I always think of it this way: that you have people complaining about the patriarchy, for instance, right? Patriarchy meaning the rule of men, right, is what it translates to. But a lot of the complaints that people have with the rule of men, with the quote, the patriarchy, it's really not, it's misconstrued. It's not about the rule of men. It's about something called purearchy, and that is the rule of boys. And so a lot of these collective crimes of the immature masculine, the collective crimes of say the domesticated, man, all this kind of gets thrown at the feet of all men and all masculinity. And you get to the point that even mature masculine men are in many ways shamed for even pursuing sort of the development of their own masculinity, right? As soon as it starts blossoming, you kind of get besieged by, I don't know what you want to call it, maybe the feminist critique, by cultural critique, by all these things, and it kind of suppresses that exploration of one's own masculinity, unfortunately.
Yeah, I tend to disagree a little bit about the argument of the need for a rite of passage. I think it's a lot more important to have a culture where male role models are present, so that it will be a gradual process. Also because people are different, and not everyone is ready to become a man at 14 years old.
Sure.
Some earlier, some later. I would like to add that I think actually, first, foremost, the most important thing, just be you. For most men, that would mean be a man. And you don't really have to add masculine there, because be a man, be you, you know. That's real, that's true, and that's all you need to do, you know. Also, I think that women are facing similar problems, although they are presented in a different way, if that makes any sense. Femininity is in crisis as well, and it's not being talked about much. We don't have to get into that too much, but I would like to say that many women, especially young women, are lost. They don't know where to go. And I'm not saying that they should necessarily go to a man, you know, and that's not what I'm saying here, but they also are confused about their femininity, as men today seem to be confused about their masculinity.
Sure.
And I'm sure that this will come up at some time in the near future, because, and don't get me wrong here, but I think feminism is not helping. Don't get me wrong, we need true feminism in the way that we should have equal opportunities, you know. But what we see now is that word being used about something entirely different. It's being used about a set of values that you need to have in order to be a feminist, right? So
Sure.
It's off track here, but anyway, it's not good for anyone. It's so much ideology into this, you know. It's too much, and it's wrong. I disagree with a lot of that ideology, but again, you know, the same goes for women. Just be you. You don't have to be a feminine woman. You just have to be a woman, right? And it really is very simple, you know. It is simple. And it brings us back to nature. If you connect with nature, a lot of these things going on just seem silly, because they are. So there you go.
Yeah. So I got one more question for you, if you got time.
Sure.
So this one's a little funny. So bear with me here, Bjorn. This is just something I've been exploring the last couple weeks. On your channel, you know, you promoted the importance of self-development, self-sufficiency, critical thinking, connected with the outdoors, all that. I've been a big advocate, as you know, of a lot of these same things for as long as I can remember. These are also the same principles that are also promoted by the last person I interviewed, Dr. Randall Eaton. But here's the funny part about this, is all three of us, coincidentally, were power lifters. Now, it might be far-fetched, but I'm curious if you think there might be some sort of connection, and maybe there isn't, but I thought I'd ask you, between sort of years of focused strength training and sort of developing some of these outlooks on life. What do you think?
Well,
is it possible?
That's interesting, actually. It's a sport, as you know, where you need to have self-discipline, because you are your own trainer, actually, most of the time, and you have to it's a thinking man's sport as well. You have to enjoy the process of developing training programs and see what works, what doesn't work. And it's also very true, you know. The bar doesn't lie, you know. If there are 300 kilos on the floor, that's 300 kilos, and you can lift it, or maybe you won't.
There's no ideology trying to tell you one thing or the other.
that as well, you know. So it is what it is. It's very honest, very true.
Yeah.
And you get tested when you lift. It's like I remember one guy. It's one guy I've trained with a lot, and he had asked another guy who was at that time, many years ago, I think, the best deadlifter in Norway or something like that, and so he was lifting 300 and something kilos, and then he had lifted 200 kilos, right? So my friend, I think, asked him, well, 200 kilos to you, it's like nothing. It's light weights. And the other guy, he had said that 200 kilos always feels heavy.
It's a good way. I love it.
I know how it is, you know. It really does, because it will never feel like light weights.
Yeah.
You still do it day after day. Well, not every day, but week after week, and you learn to enjoy it, and you learn to enjoy the process of getting stronger. I think most people I know, I've been doing powerlifting for my entire adult life, and self-disciplined people. Yeah, I'm just rambling here, but
No. Wait, do you know the term spitballing? Have you ever heard the term? It's an American expression. We say, like, we're just spitballing here. So that's what you're doing. We're throwing around ideas, and we're seeing what sticks. We're seeing if there's anything to it.
It's you need to be independent, because it's not a team sport.
Right.
I would say so.
So there might be something there. We'll have to explore that
further.
further.
Yeah, well, it's a very early, primeval sport. We know that we talked about the Vikings, and we know that they lifted weights, not weights like our weights, but rocks. And if you go to Iceland, you can try to carry those rocks and see if you can set a new record. And some guy back in the old days carried that rock for like this distance. And
did you do the one where you go around the building there? You go around like the ruins of that building?
I haven't done that there. No, but I actually won a competition. No, I was 94, 95. I won the rock carrying competition in Norway. So that year I was the best rock carrier in Norway.
That's not on your bio, Bjorn. You gonna update that?
No, now it was a bit of fun, but I almost threw up, because I managed to get that rock very high up here. So I had a good grip on the rock. That was my advantage. But then you start walking. And I walked until I almost threw up, and then I flipped the rock down. I still remember that. That was really hard.
Yeah. I was in Iceland a couple years ago, and I went to what's his name? Hafthor Bjornson's gym. He has a private gym there, the powerlifter guy, and I've never seen anything like it in my life, Bjorn. The size of the weights that were in that gym, and the size of the people, by the way, that were in that gym, it was unbelievable. I got a picture of me with some of his training partners, and these guys, every single one of them was like 6'5" or above, and they were just some big boys.
Those are the strong men, right?
Yeah. He won World's Strongest Man. It would have been a couple of years ago.
I have to tell you, because this is important to me. That's entirely different, because they do not compete or train on the same terms as I train and compete, because there are no testing for doping there, right?
Yeah.
So that makes it totally different and much more dangerous game that they are playing. And also, they don't do proper deadlift. They
Yeah,
use
no, I was going to say the events are all completely different, right? I mean, it's they're pushing stuff, they're dragging cars, they're doing all that stuff.
It's a different, and I
Yeah.
don't even want to call it a sport actually, and that might infuriate some people. But when you don't test people for illegal substances, then it's not a proper sport in my opinion. And I know the attitude towards that is very different in the USA. Well, at least that's my impression. But it's important to me because I get compared to these people, and that's not right. That's
Sure.
not right.
No. Powerlifting is yeah, I mean it's legitimate strength training in the gym usually, doing standardized lifts and
Yeah,
so
well,
on.
the difference is that I don't use steroids. Never
Yes.
have, never will.
Yeah, no.
And that would change the game entirely if I did. I won't do that, but that would obviously, that could make that's the reason why they are those people you mentioned. Now, I don't know who you met, but in general, strongmen tend to be much bigger, and the reason is that it's not natural. So that's just how it is.
Yeah. No, in the States too, we have, so I'm a leaner guy, but still do powerlifting. In the States, we have these things, they're called pound for pound powerlifting competitions. I don't know if you have them in Norway or anything, but it's pretty neat. So for instance, like on the bench, you'll weigh in, and then you'll go to the bench and you'll have 3 lifts to lift your maximum bench press weight. And then you get a point for every pound between your body weight and your highest lift. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, that's the same as in the IPF, which is my organization, the international organization IPF, and points. Your body weight will give you will be well, you get points because it's relative to your body weight. So that's why you can sometimes find that in the world championships, the best lifter might be a 60 kilo guy.
Right. Pound for pound.
Yeah, because relative to his body weight, he might have done better actually than the 100 kilo guy and so on. I don't like that because I've never really done that well in when
yeah,
it comes
you're a bigger guy.
So
I've always liked it because for me, like one of the things I loved was that at the end of that, they did a separate thing where it was a contest to bench your own body weight as many times as you could. And so you get points for that. And that would be combined with your 2 scores. And it's funny is that you'd have the biggest, strongest guys tended to really struggle with the reps on the body weight, but they could lift, far more than I could lift. Obviously, like their bench press was way more impressive, but it's all that the ratio, if you will, is
how it is. You know how it is. Any set with more than 3 reps is cardio.
Exactly. Yeah. No. I understand completely. Well, anyway, Bjorn, it's been awesome talking to you. It's been awesome running through this stuff, talking about Vikings, talking about nature, talking about self-development, even a little bit of powerlifting on the end there. Yeah, I can't thank you enough for taking the opportunity to sit down and to have a chat. Love to do it again sometime. So thank you.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Very interesting chat. So thank you for that.
Alrighty, folks, just before I go, I want to make sure that I thank my Patreon patrons. So special thank you to my gold tier patrons, The Innocents, Ashley Gertensen, Hurtin Wade, Man vs. Moose, Bryce V, Cyber, Montgomery Johnson, Will S. Baker, Joshua Bale, Rich Christensen, Comrade Krieger, Epic Dale, Sean Hatfield, Blake Graham, Dawson E, Zonk Breezes, Noah Ovens, David Perkins, Sneaky Ninja, Noah5943, Jigsaw, Your Pal Mitch, Old Hog Nose, Coco Rockout, Occam's Ghost, Reese Yearby, Ari Bakalers, Mythical Beast 60, and Gavin Abernathy. Also want to make sure that I thank my silver and bronze tier patrons as well. It's you Patreon supporters that allow me to keep doing everything I do here. So thank you all for your ongoing contributions. Let's keep growing. Let's keep making some awesome content. There's much more to come, so stay tuned. We'll see you all next time.